Hello, this is Kathy Beatty with Divorce Support Anonymous, and hoping that you are wrapping up this year with great expectations of 2024. And joining me this morning is Tabby Westbrook, who has a phenomenal background, but she also has a beautiful sense of adventure that I'm hoping we can all tap into and be inspired by. Good morning, Tabby.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks so much for being with us. So just for folks to get to know you a little bit, will you give us an introduction about yourself and your all those letters behind your name?
Yes, I will introduce myself in the alphabet soup that I am. So, my name is Tabitha Westbrook, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed professional counselor, licensed clinical mental health counselor, certified clinical trauma professional, and certified sex addiction therapist. And that's just a few of my letters. I'm also EMDR certified and an EMDR approved consultant, and an AAMFT approved supervisor. I do a lot of the things. And I have a private practice in Wake Forest, North Carolina, and an office in Flower Mound, Texas. And I have a few clinicians and interns that work for me. And we work with folks who have experienced the worst of the worst. So complex trauma, domestic abuse, and coercive control, things like that, help people be healed and whole and free. And we also help churches understand those dynamics and that sort of thing. So that's kind of what I do in my professional world. And that's why I'm called Alphabet Soup.
Yes, no kidding. And there are so many topics that we could cover right now for my audience and my viewers. But talk to us about your personal life, your background. You're hanging out in Texas right now.
I am. I live in Texas, and so I go back and forth between Texas and North Carolina probably about 4 times a year. But I get around quite a bit, which is what we're going to end up talking about today. But yeah, so I live and work here, but travel quite a bit, and I'm happy to be able to travel because in the summer, I think God said, "Texas, thou shalt be the surface of the sun," and so it gets hot, hot here, and I am not a hot, hot kind of lover. I'm much more of a winter gal, so it's nice to be able to get out of the steamy Texas weather and have a few other adventures at times.
Yeah, for sure. And I can't wait to hear about them and have people hear about them. So let me ask, how has your faith played a part in your adventurous spirit?
I mean, I think we have a God of adventure. He is not a boring God. I used to laugh when, people would say, "Oh, Christianity is boring." And I'm like, I don't think you've met Jesus. He is a God of all kinds of adventure. And he, I think, is, he's the author of creativity, he's the author of beauty, and there's just so much to see in this world that he has created. And even in its broken and fallen state, there's still such incredible beauty out there to behold. And I think that we see something of our creator when we behold beauty and we take it in and soak it up. And that to me is just such a delightful part of our faith, that he gives us such good things. Now, I mean, life is hard. It says in First Peter, we are going to struggle. Don't be surprised when these fiery trials, come upon you. And we are not. But also, like, God promises us goodness and freedom and abundance. And I think that we get to see all of those things in his creation.
I love that. And for us to be creative as God is creative and getting out there and exploring and creating, and it's just lovely, lovely in the way it's supposed to be. So, what has been or currently your favorite adventure?
Oh gosh. That's like such a hard question because they're all like my babies, and there's so many fun things that I've gotten to do. I would say that hands down, if I had to pick just one, um, back in 2015, my son is now an adult human, but he was not an adult human at that point. We took the Amtrak across the United States together and went all over the place. It took 15 days and we saw the entire country. We were able to put our feet, we'd put our feet in the Atlantic because at the time we lived in North Carolina. We were able to put our feet in the Pacific. We were able to see, some of the greatest mountain ranges, class 5 rapids that you wouldn't be able to see anywhere other than a train. And I am not getting in a raft to go see a class 5 rapid. That is not my jam. And so I think that was probably one of the greatest adventures that he and I have had together. And it's certainly the vacation we still talk about.
Wow, I can see why. What an opportunity to bond with your son and to have that memory. That's amazing.
Mhm.
So amazing. So have you always been adventurous, or did you get to a point in your life where you decided intentionally you're going to try new things and make life an adventure?
I think that I wouldn't say I've always been adventurous. I think there's always been a draw to see and to know. I think that's one of the things that makes me a good therapist is that I really want to know people and places and things and cultures and that sort of thing. Um, but I think that there was a time in my life I was so oppressed I would have said I'm not even a creative person. Like I'm not capable. I can't do these things. I exist in a fluffier body than some. And so I had had words spoken over me about you can't, you shouldn't, you're not allowed, those kinds of things. But when God really set me free from an abusive marriage, I said, I'm going to live this life. And, I was tired of letting other people define who God says I am. I wanted God to define who he says I am. And there's such a great love in my soul of just seeing and knowing. And also, I think having a kiddo helped a lot. I never wanted him to have a narrow perspective. I had grown up with kids who had never left the small town that I lived in. And I had moved to North Carolina, a small town in North Carolina at the time I moved there. When I was in middle school, and the narrow view of people in some of my classes like was astonishing to me. I was like, there is like really cool stuff out there. And so I think that those things and not wanting my own child to have a narrow view were things that really pushed me to get out there and go see for myself.
Mm. That is so cool. And I know that you have touched the heart of many people as you talk about coming from an oppressive situation and relationship and breaking through that. And really, that is what the key of what I want our viewers to hear and to know that even though you come from that background, there is such beautiful potential for your life, the other side of this
Mhm.
relationship, difficult relationship, divorce, whatever it is. How beautifully, beautifully stated. Um, so many after divorce or just in general live in fear instead of faith. They're afraid to create their own adventure. How did you get this adventure mindset, which you touched on, but maybe someone encouraged you along the way, or it snowballed once you started, you couldn't stop?
I think God, he's so merciful in how he works with each of us. And it really started for me in a job where I had to travel 60% of the time. So before I worked as a therapist, I had a whole other career for 22 years in clinical pharmaceutical research. And so I traveled and audited sites and all over the world, and so I had to learn how to travel by myself and figure those things out. And I thankfully had a little bit of the safety net of a company that helped me with that. But as a single mom, I've been to some of the most beautiful places. I mean, honestly, if God said you're going to relocate and serve me in Buenos Aires in Argentina, I'd be like, peace out, bye, because it is one of my favorite places in the world. It is such a great place. And, I think it was some of those things where it's like, I have to figure this out because this is how I'm keeping a roof over my head that kind of started it. But, I could have not kept doing that after I changed careers. And I don't think I would be happy if I had chosen to not do that and not, gone into trying to figure some things out. And I think, for most people, I think it's the fear of what if I can't figure it out. But we have such a great experience these days with the internet that we can, sometimes it's used for evil, but it can be really used for good too, of like figuring things out and finding groups that are doing something similar where you can kind of get involved and learn from them. I will never forget my very first ever business trip. I was just a wee lass. And at the time I was still married. And I went to Boston for a conference. And I had never been outside of like places I'd been able to drive. I'd gone to Ohio, where I'm from. I lived in North Carolina and I'd been to Florida. So like we are not talking global trotter at that point at all. And I didn't know how to hail a taxi. So I didn't know there were taxi queues at airports. I didn't know anything. And at the time, like this is a long time ago because I am not in my 20s anymore. But I didn't like you couldn't Google it, right? And so I had this taxi driver go, "Hey, I can pick you up." Well, I didn't know I wasn't in the queue. And so the airport authority was screaming at him. He was screaming back. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. What am I going to do?" And the airport authority goes, "Get in and don't ever do that again." And I was like, "Holy cow."
Wow.
Okay. And so I asked around at the conference, I was like, "Okay, what did I do wrong?" And they explained it. And I was like, "Okay, all right." And so I think being able and willing to make some mistakes is part of how you sort of do this. And what ways I learned is like, it's probably not going to be the worst thing ever. Like, especially if you travel domestically to where you are areas that you're familiar with, cultures you're familiar with to a great degree, even though in the United States, there's a lot of different cultures here. But if you kind of stick within that, like I found that like failure is always an option and you probably won't die from it. And so I think that was kind of what fueled it. It was like, okay, I made it through this challenging piece. And, and I lived to tell the tale. And so now I just have to, kind of learn from this and do the next thing. And so I think that's been kind of my vibe, if you will, is to just try it and try something small. Like I went to Boston, not a big deal, right? Like probably not the worst thing ever, not the most adventurous thing I've ever done. But it was, kind of had those safety nets of like, it probably can't go terribly. I mean, worst thing would have happened was, the airport authority would have like shoot off the cabbie and told me where to go and maybe used a colorful language with it. And it wouldn't have been the worst thing ever.
Yeah. I love that. And I imagine you would be the one who congratulates yourself. It's like, yay, I did Boston.
Mhm.
How important that is that we encourage ourselves that, yeah, maybe it didn't
Yes.
go perfectly, but hey, congratulations to me. I made it to Boston and lived to tell.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, you learn little things and like I think part of it is seeing the wonder
Mm.
in what is created. Like in Boston, I learned facts about the city. I took a, city tour. I took a duck tour where they drive you into, the harbor and stuff, which is always super fun. When like driving you on land and then into the water, those are just ridiculous. And I love those, old military vehicles where they do that. And so like, learning things like that and learning about the area that you're in, and you can find these fascinating things. And then so when you go back, then you expand on it. So I've now been to Boston a number of times. And so each time I learn a little bit more about the city and like explore a little bit farther and maybe a little bit more off the beaten path. But it's because I know where I'm comfortable at this point in time and like I have some things to fall back on.
Yeah. And what I love is you're curious and how
Yes.
important that is that we keep open and curious about our world, about our travels, relationships, everything. Remain curious
Yes.
how important that is. I don't want to skip. I'm not sure where to ask this question, but you have to talk about your hiking because we were at a conference at AACC and we were having dinner with some other folks from Equip, Leslie Vernick's group, and you were talking about your hiking. And we all kind of sat there like, wow, are you brave? And I love that you do that. So would you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Well, I will first of all say I am team sloth. I will get there when I get there, and I am slower than molasses rolling uphill in the winter. So, like, I am not doing any of those like ultra hiking kind of things like that. So, I want to just like clarify that because I think people and this is what happened for me. This is how I ended up a hiker. I used to walk a ton when I was a kid, and I used to like, where I lived was a small town at the time. It's not anymore, but was there were woods everywhere. So I was in and out of the woods all the time, walking around and like hiking. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I was like, trees and dirt are my friends, and I like it. And it was always just a place where I could connect with the Lord and feel free and that sort of thing. But through a lot of the abuse that I suffered, I kind of like got away from that because my husband didn't let me do anything. It was not I was not allowed, and so that was really unfortunate. But also, I ended up just kind of being this shell of myself in so many ways. And I knew that I liked hiking. And so, I had the fortune of going camping with some friends, which I'd never camped. My family was not a camping family. my mom's version of camping was like, the Waldorf Astoria or the Four Seasons or something like that, right? Like Days Inn was roughing it, which Days Inn sometimes is roughing it, but but like there was not going to be sleeping on the ground in the woods. That was not happening. But I had some friends who were like, "Hey, let's go up into the Rocky Mountains and camp," and it was such a grand adventure, and I enjoyed it. And I didn't do it alone. I had some help and some support. But then I was just like, I really like being out in the woods, and I need to kind of figure that out. But I was like, oh, I can't. I'm, too overweight, blah, blah, blah. And then I found this YouTuber called Homemade Wanderlust. Her name is Jessica Mills. Her trail name is Dixie. And I started watching her videos. Gosh, it's been a hot minute. And it's been a long time now. And she told the story of a woman she met when she through hiked the Appalachian Trail. And through hiking is where you start at the beginning and end at the end. So the Appalachian Trail starts in Georgia and ends in Maine. It's like a 2,190-ish mile journey. It takes about 6 months for people to hike it straight through when they do. And she met this woman who was overweight and was doing it anyway. And I was like, huh, okay, I'm going to try that. So I started doing some research on like what gear I might need and that sort of thing. My first hiking pictures, I'm wearing denim. I don't recommend hiking in denim, especially not in August, which is when that picture was taken. 10 out of 10, don't recommend. But I got a good pair of shoes and trekking poles, and trekking poles are my friends because they keep me from making unplanned rapid descents down the side of a mountain, which none of us want to do, aka falling. And so I was like, okay, I can kind of do this. I had some gear together. My very, very first hike was when my son was 8, and we hiked to the base of a waterfall. And it was like a wide trail. I mean, you couldn't have gotten lost if you had tried. Like you would have had to really work to get lost. And I can get lost in a brown paper bag with no problem. I am so directionally challenged. So I was like, okay, I kind of built up my confidence. And then I decided I wanted to hike to the top of a mountain. I'd never done that before and I wanted to do it. So I researched what mountains were around an area I was going to be in. I was in Asheville, North Carolina for a conference, and I wanted to hike on the Appalachian Trail. And so I was like, all right, how do I get there? How do I do this? And I found this mountain called it's a bald technically, which is still the top of a mountain, just no trees. And it's called Max Patch. And I was like, all right, I can do that. So in my two-wheel drive vehicle, which was a little dicey at the time, I took this twisty turny mountain road with my kid, and I was like, it'll be fine, we probably won't die. and, and just stayed not too close to the right side where I could tumble off the side of the mountain in the vehicle. And we made it up to the parking lot, and it sits right on the Tennessee North Carolina border. And I was like, I can figure this out. And I remember getting to the top of that mountain, seeing my first white blaze, which is the Appalachian Trail is signified by this like white, they call it a blaze. It's a white trail marker. And I saw my first white blaze in person, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And it was the perfect day. The weather was amazing. And I got all the way to the actual mountaintop where you're at the summit and you have a 360-degree view of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And it is epic. It is just epic. And there, the Appalachian Trail literally runs right over the top of this mountain. So I had my feet on the Appalachian Trail at the top of this mountain with the most gorgeous views I have ever seen. And I burst into tears in front of everybody that was up there because I was so proud that I had in my body made it to the top. And so, and all of the other hikers, and this is one of the things I love about the hiking community. People are just so gracious and kind. And they were high-fiving me and congratulating me and saying how proud they were of me. And did I want them to take a picture? Like it was delightful. And then on a loop trail, I got lost going down. Because of course I did. And so these lovely hikers helped me find my way back to my car with my kiddo because I was like, great, I'm gonna live here now. I can think of worse places to live. Um, but I just remember the feeling of accomplishment that I had when I got back to my truck and I was like, I'm hooked. This is it. I want to do this all the time. And so I have set about finding places to hike in various places that I go. I always keep my trekking poles and a pair of shoes in the car because you just never know when a trail shall present itself. And so I have been very fortunate to hike some pretty cool trails. They're not going to be the hardest trails, but they're trails that are meaningful to me.
But you initiated that and you said, this is what I'm going to do on your own and brought
Yes.
your child, but on your own. And that is, it's something we all need to aspire to. And it's so beautiful, Tabby. I just love your adventurous mindset. So let me ask you this. Oh, you have to talk about your knife on your neck.
My neck knife.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is another homemade wanderlust thing. One of the things that Dixie, and I've had the good pleasure of speaking with her. She is a lovely person. She sells every year to her, followers or whatever, a handmade neck knife. That goes around your neck, and it's really handy. You always should have 10 essentials whenever you're hiking. And I always carry all 10 essentials again because I can get lost on a loop trail, as we've discovered. So I always have a knife with me. And I almost am always wearing my neck knife. And that is for personal protection, but also for like opening things or whittling or like cutting up, small firewood and stuff like that. So it's a useful thing. And it does make people do a second glance when they figure out what it is. I met up some folks I'd met in a hammock forum because I do like to hammock hang. I am getting older. My knees don't love the ground. So I'm like, let's hang up between two trees. It sounds like fun. So again, like everything, I just learned how to do it. I met people who knew how to do it and asked a bunch of questions and then figured it out from there. And so when I moved to Texas, I found a group here that hangs, which is wild because there aren't as many trees as one would hope. But I went to my very first meetup with them, and one of the guys was like, "Hey, I'll take you down to where we're all camping. Do you mind if I ride in your truck?" And I was like, "Sure." And so he got in the truck with me, and he's like, "Are you wearing a neck knife?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Oh," and I said, "And if you get close enough to me to have to really see it, it's not going to be good for one of us." And he was like, he goes, "I should not mess with you." And I said, "No, you should not." And he was a delightful person. So it's not like he was sketchy or anything. But yes, I wear a neck knife when I hike, again, for personal protection and for opening things on the trail that one might need to open and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and so that list of 10, if you are going hiking, you should look that up. I'm sure you can Google that and
Yes.
find 10.
REI has a great, so if you look up like 10 essentials REI, they have it all listed out for you. And it's super easy. And you don't have to buy super expensive products to get to your 10 essentials. But I do say, even if you're just doing a day hike and not planning on being in the backcountry for like ever, or like overnight or anything, always carry them. I've gotten lost a couple times where I thought I am going to have to make camp. I did not. I managed to find my way out of the woods, but there are some things that are really important. They also have satellite locators. I carry what's called a Garmin InReach, which is a satellite phone. Essentially, you can text people, let them know where you are, and then if you need to, you can call search and rescue. There's an SOS button that uses the satellite network to help you get search and rescue to you. So I do carry that whenever I'm out because if I ever did need to get help, then I want to be able to do that.
Mhm. And that same list might be able to be used for your first date once you start dating too.
True, you can always carry a satellite communicator then too.
So when were you afraid, but you did it anyway?
There have been so many times,
I bet.
like so many times that I've been like, I don't know about this. But I would say most of those adventures are times that I have been more remote, and had to figure something out and tried to like get something done. Like, I mean, and I've had some challenging experiences, at times, but gosh, I mean, I would say the last time I hiked Max Patch because I was coming off of a season where I'd been super, super sick. So that would have been so last year I almost died a couple of times because my body decided to have a moment. And it was in April of this year that I was able to hike again. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna go to the top of Max Patch. And so the road up was fine. I knew to expect it to be dicey, but my GPS taking me back decided we're going to go through every holler that is anywhere near this mountain. So I was on some sketchy roads and I was like, okay. But like, you just have to kind of figure it out because I was like, well, I can't live on the road and I definitely am not stopping. But then I saw this amazing waterfall and I was like, I mean, I have to stop and look at the waterfall.
Yeah.
So I pulled over and I got out and I spent a little time at the waterfall and took some pictures and then left. Because I wasn't sure, like, was it private property? Like, I was still on the road, but I was a little bit nervous. But like coming down that mountain, I was like, It's a little sketch, but it'll be fine. And I was real happy when I got to paved road, but I also have a 4-wheel drive truck. So I was just like, we'll just drop into 4-wheel drive. It'll be okay.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Your attitude is so inspiring, and I just loved listening that night when we had dinner and just your input on all of the times that we come together. It's so inspiring. But how did you conquer fear and give yourself grace when the adventures failed and didn't bring the results that you hoped for?
I would say I'm imperfect at this, right? And I think that that would be true for everybody. So in 2022, I was camping on the side of an 8,000-foot mountain. My body does not like altitude, and we found out on that trip just how much it did not. And I thought I was going to be okay. I knew I had problems with altitude. I've known since the very first time I ever visited Colorado back in like 2004 or 5, something like that. I got altitude sickness almost immediately. And so I was prepared because I'd gotten altitude sickness in 2021 while camping in the Rockies yet again. And I was like, okay, like I know what to do. So I had taken all of these things. I had electrolytes and I had altitude sickness medication and I had plenty of water and really healthy foods. And like I was doing it all right, you know? And my body said, no, ma'am, we are not okay. And I'm not having a good time. And I was really frustrated because I had to abort my trip. I ended up in the ER. And then, like we were at the point where some friends were like, am I going to have to fly out to get you? Except I was in this super remote area that's really hard to fly to. And so the doctor said, I'm going to hydrate you and you're going to drive across those mountains and you're going to go. You got to go home. You got to get below 5,000 feet and you just stay there.
Mm.
And so I couldn't like just bail and fly home because I was with my truck, my camper, and my cat. So it was just like I have to figure this out. And so as I was driving out of Moab, Utah, which is where I was in the ER, which is also really hard to fly into, um, I just remember feeling really frustrated and feeling like I had failed and like I should have done something better. And as the sun rose, because I was discharged from the ER when it was like, oh, dark 30. As I watched the sunrise over the desert, I really felt like the Lord just said, I'm with you. I'm with you. And it's okay that you're mad. And it's okay that this didn't go to plan. And I just prayed and cried and, also tried not to die. And then, as I was coming through, because the way you come back to Texas is you have to cut this corner of Colorado, and the aspens had started to turn because it was October. And I don't know if you've ever seen a golden aspen, but they are incredibly beautiful trees. And they also live in community, right? You'll never just find one aspen. They're always in a cluster because they share a root system. And I had people in my life texting me who knew what was going on, just saying, hey, we're with you. We're praying for you. We've got your back, keep us abreast. Cause I still had to go over some big mountains to get back to not being in big mountains. And I just remember looking at those aspens and saying, I know I can't go up into the high Rockies right now. My body won't let me, but at least I can see them and I can see those trees. And I know I'm not alone because the Lord is with me and my friends are with me. And I knew that if I got stuck in Colorado, a few hours away was a friend who had already offered, like, if you get stuck in Colorado, I'm coming for you. So I had people along the way who could, once I got out of Utah, could get to me if they needed to, if I just couldn't go further. And when I pulled into the hotel in Amarillo, Texas, which is at 4,400 feet, I can now tell you the elevation of all sorts of places. They were like, what hotel and what room? And by the time I had gotten parked up and checked into that hotel, because I had to get the cat settled in the trailer and all that good stuff, there was Chick-fil-A waiting at my room
Oh,
for me. And so even though I was frustrated about what I couldn't do, God was still with me, and the community that I have was with me, and they loved me well, even though I had to do the work of getting myself to safety for my body. I had people who were praying for me, who were checking in on me when I went over the Continental Divide and got super nauseated because it's real high. It's like 7,200 and some odd feet. And I was like, oh, that doesn't feel good to my body right now. I got a text that said, hey, I'm praying for you. I love you. Just want, I know, you're going to make it. And I think that was really helpful. And even when I finally got home back to the Dallas area, my home group met me at the house and helped me park the trailer. Cause at that point I was like, I don't even know if I can back this thing in. I mean, I don't back it in on a good day, let alone a bad day. And, they got me and the cat upstairs and settled and made sure I was okay. And so I think it's a lot easier to give yourself grace when you really just stop and think about it and when the Lord shows himself to you. And again, I don't do it perfectly. There were some real moments of frustration, leading up to having to, get myself out of there, but the Lord never let me go.
I love that. And you speak of two things that are vitally important as we do this adventure called life is you need a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. You just really do. And you need that community, which is just how God designed us to have a relationship with him and to have a community to support you. And that, that takes work for all of us. It doesn't happen naturally. For many of us, we have to put forth the effort. So, note to self, note to all of us that it's a beautiful illustration of what we need in life, Tabby. I love that so much. What do
And
you think?
well,
Go ahead.
I just want to talk about community for a second, because I think if people are listening and they're like, I'm introverted, I don't know how to do that. You know, Healing happens in community, first of all. And I think sometimes when we come through a difficult marriage and end up divorced, we think, who's going to want to be around me? I am damaged goods. And that is that's not consistent with what God says about us at all, or how he created us. Now, if you're more introverted, now I am as extroverted as they come. I will talk to a brick wall. But for people who aren't me, that you can still have beautiful, meaningful community and deep relationships. It just starts with like one person, you know, and it doesn't, you don't have to have 75,000 friends, right? You can have a good core group of a couple, two or three or four, and that's enough. So I just want folks to like be like, well, I could never be like her. I don't want you to be like me. I want you to be like you, but I don't want you to sell yourself short either on having community because you feel like, oh, well, I can't. It might be a little bit harder. It might be a little bit scary sometimes to like push into those places, but it's really beautiful and vital. And truthfully, like some of us extroverted people just start adopting introverts. I'm a people collector because I love people. So like you might get adopted by me. You just never know. And there are people like me out there.
I love that so much. So, what should single people do to become more adventurous?
Start with something small. Like you don't have to be like, I'm going to go to a foreign country and backpack Europe and take all the trains, although that would be super fun. Um, just start with something small. Maybe you look up a really cool bed and breakfast that looks like fun. There's one in Arkansas that is one of my favorites. It's just glorious and beautiful, and they all know my name because I've been there so many times now. But pick something small that feels a little bit outside your comfort zone. So if it's like I'm gonna go to a city that maybe I've always wanted to see but have never been to, you go and you stay in like a nice hotel. You don't have to like camp or rough it or do a hostel or something like that. And you go and you just explore. I think the city bus tours, like there's Old Town Trolley in some places where you can do the hop on, hop off. That's a great way to get started. They tell you the history, and you might think, oh, I don't want to do touristy things, but man, those are helpful things. And you can sometimes meet people on those tours. There's also, especially for women, there are female-led tours of like the whole world that you can go on. So like where you're in a group of women that may not know each other, so you're not going to be the only one who doesn't know anybody. And you just go on like an excursion. So you might go to Japan or take a cruise, or one of my friends, her sister just came back from Antarctica. I mean, on a tour with women, and that's what she does. And so I think starting small with something that feels a little outside your comfort zone, but still feels safe, is a great way to just give it a go. And don't expect perfection. I think, like there's always something when you travel a bit and adventure that's just going to be a little bit weird. I mean, like one of the things on that Amtrak trip that I kind of started off talking about was we were never on time anywhere. Like, I do not think Amtrak can run on time to save their souls, but you just go, okay, this is what we're doing, and like sometimes because they share tracks with freight companies, like the freight trains have the right of way. And so you'll be sitting on the side of, the road, like basically like pulled over for a train. And but you get to see these beautiful landscapes and you get to take time at a different pace. And so like being okay with flexible expectations and starting off small is such a good way to kind of dip your toe in the water and look for the good. When we just look for the negative, like the flight delay or the fact they lost our luggage, which totally has happened to me, I did learn that in your carry-on, pack some underwear and like clean outfits and things like that. Like be wise. That is, real helpful. But you know what? When I was in Buenos Aires the first time, I was washing my underwear in the sink. It was just what it was, and you figure it out and you make it work and you laugh along the way. And now the when it doesn't go quite to plan and I have a good story afterwards, that is called type 2 fun. So I have a lot of type 2 fun stories where I'm like, that didn't go the way I'd hoped, but they're great stories. And
Yeah.
so don't be afraid of a great story.
Yeah, and it's really the attitude, right? You just explained
Yes.
it beautifully. It's your attitude about it. Yeah, don't have high expectations. Just go for the adventure. So you know the gifts and skills that given you, and they're amazing in all of your expertise. But how is your work an adventure?
Oh my gosh. Um, well, first of all, I get to meet a lot of really cool people, which is amazing to me. I think, there's nothing better to me than meeting somebody for the first time who says, I can't see light, all I see is darkness, because they're in such a hard place. That when I end my time with them, because they don't need me anymore, they are in a completely different place and they live in light and not darkness. I think that is one of the greatest adventures, because we are essentially getting into the valley of the shadow of death, but we are not making camp. We are making our way out the other side with the help of the Holy Spirit and healing. And it's really cool. And to me, like that is just such a beautiful thing. And also, I've gotten to do some really cool things because there's a lot of stuff I know, particularly about abuse. And so being able to go and talk to people and have them go, oh my gosh, I didn't know this was a thing. I am a big believer with abusive behavior. Once you see, you can't unsee. And I want people to know when it presents itself so that they can't unsee. And it's real hard to be an abuser if you don't have any victims. And so if people are wise and learn the signs and those sorts of things, then it makes it really hard for the enemy to use that. So, will it ever be perfect this side of heaven? No. But I am so grateful to get to see and do what I get to see and do. And honestly, I think it's in those quiet spaces in my office when I'm sitting across from someone and it is sacred and holy ground, where no one will ever see that piece of my adventure. No one will ever know the stories I know. But I know that I am face to face with what God is doing. And that is probably the funnest thing ever. And the fact that like I get to travel all over creation is also a great perk
Yeah.
of the job that I have.
I have to agree with you to be able to sit there and to see God show up and God do what he does in healing and working with people and helping them articulate and see. It is like absolutely holy ground and
Mhm.
so sacred and such a privilege to be able to witness what God does in his healing of
Yeah.
broken people. So
And then to see my clients take on adventure, right? Like I've
yeah,
had clients who have said, oh, I can't fill in the blank, whatever it is. And we work together and I'm like, well, let's try. Like, let's build a plan. And then I have clients who are like, hurtling down the side of the mountain, doing the Virginia Creeper Trail, which I 10 out of 10 recommend. First of all, it's all downhill. You don't have to pedal a whole lot. So, like, no matter what your fitness level is, like, you can hurdle and we can all hurdle down the side of a mountain. It's fantastic. It also crosses the Appalachian Trail, which we all know I love. So, but like, little things like that where it's like I get to see them take on the adventures that God has for them, whether that's learning how to hike. I have clients that have learned how to like watercolor. And so now they paint and, just all kinds of really cool things. And I get a front row seat to other people's adventures, which is so awesome.
truly, truly. Tabby, this has been wonderful. I could keep you forever and hear your adventures and your wisdom and your perspective is just such a beautiful thing for the world. So thank you for who you are, what you do, and what God is using you for.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
It has been. So I'll have to stay posted, and hopefully I can help my viewers stay posted on the adventures of Tabby, because they will be continue to be many, I'm sure.
I hope so. I'm not done.
I'm sure. I know you're not. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
You are so welcome.